Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to depart from our usual discussion about jurisdictions and taxes and passports and residencies and all these different things to discuss a more generic topic for a change. And this is a subject that I've noticed a lot of people fall into. It affects the types of questions that people ask about structuring, but honestly, it affects many, many different areas of life. I think it's kind of an important, what you might call like a critical life skill and a critical success skill, okay? And so I'm going to cover it in as much detail as I can today, just kind of laying out the examples of where I've seen this. I've seen it quite a bit, and I think that it gives some semblance of, it's like a mental model, right? How it is that we conceptualize and look at the world, what our processes are. And maybe just backtrack for a second. I think one of the things that a lot of people focus too little on is the value of process, okay? So for example, if you think about in government, right? There is the process that you go through, right? There are the people who are going through that process, right? And there are decisions that get made. And, similarly, you might say, hey, there's like I just bought a new car the other day. So, okay, you have a car, right? And the car has things that, like it has parts and, so it's made up of different pieces, right? But there's also the ways that those pieces work together. And oftentimes the best results in life, in business, in everything, come from focusing more on the process than on the other components, okay? Of course, these ripple out into there. But if you have the right process, you tend to get pretty good results, okay? And a good example of this is you'll look at the quality of writing that comes out of, let's say, for instance, a university thesis, say for a master's, is pretty high, right? It doesn't really matter what you think particularly about, the content or, the field of study or anything like that. Generally speaking, these are pretty comprehensive, robust, polished documents, right? By contrast, if you were to look at the quality of most tweets, it's pretty low, right? And what's one of the big differences of that? Well, it's the process that you're forced to go through in the one case versus the other. And so today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how that process affects if you're looking at where you want to move. What sort of structure should you do? How do you optimize your taxes? How do you build your business? How do you work on getting more out of your team? How do you get more out of yourself? How do you, on and on and on, right? Like many, many different areas of life. So we're going to talk about that today with respect to, like I said, I'll go into some specifics. And I hope you enjoy it. If you have comments, I would love to hear them. Would appreciate the feedback. And before we do that, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I really appreciate your support on this channel. We're working hard to try and grow it. You can go and check out, we produce great videos for you every single day, or try to make great videos. If you'd like help with international tax optimization, figuring out where to go, getting residencies, citizenships, forming international companies, building international structures, doing banking, etc., please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below. Or you can send a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so the way that I'm going to talk about this is how people misidentify the problem that they need to solve, okay? And I've seen this in the last week in talking to some people about structuring, right? So they come and the problem that arises that throws them off is they're trying to solve for the wrong problem. And if you're trying to solve for the wrong problem, you're likely to get poor results. So these things, of course, you have a desired result, but you need to figure out, how do I solve for the right problem? The same is true in society, right? I would see this oftentimes in media where something comes up, and I feel as though there's a failure to first identify what is the problem. And you can look at, for example, in Toyota, they built into the Toyota production system root cause analysis, what they call the 5 whys, right? And what they do there is they successively ask, why is this? Okay, well, why is that? Okay, well, why is that? Okay, why is that? Why is that? And they peel the layers back. And so this is just really, really important. So many times, people they poorly identify what the problem is. And if you poorly identify what the problem is, you may solve for that problem, and the answer that you get still does not achieve the result that you're looking for, okay? So I think it's really, really important to start by being able to diagnose what is the problem, okay? And so let's talk a little bit about just some underlying concepts that get lost here, right? One is the tendency to confuse correlation for causation, of course, and we might throw in the idea of what I would call a conduit or a catalyst as well. These four things often get confused with each other. And so probably you're familiar with correlation versus causation, and Nassim Taleb has been doing some really interesting videos on the basics of statistics lately. What are like 10-minute videos explaining concepts and showing how actually correlation is useless in certain environments, and how things that are supposedly correlated really give you mostly noise. And there's lots of examples of things like that. So he'll attack, IQ and other examples. So certainly there's a lot to be said for just not confusing correlation with causation, like holding yourself to a rigorous standard of saying, hey, is this thing are these two things that seem to me to be correlated, are they causal? And I think the opposite is also true, which is you can reverse the causal chain, right? So I'll give you an example. I was homeschooled for a few years, and I was talking to my wife earlier today, actually. And one of my brothers was also homeschooled, and then the other one was not. And we were just talking about the development of social skills. And one story would be, listen, what happened was somebody didn't they're homeschooled, so while they might have developed certain skills, they didn't develop the same level of social skills, right? The other one is the reverse causation, which is to say, well, actually, what happened was the person who had worse social skills to begin with had a greater interest in being homeschooled, and so you reverse the causation, right? The causal chain, like the order of the causal chain, is really important in figuring out kind of what the mechanics are of where you want to go. Now, in the example that I was talking about here, it wasn't a correlation causation thing. It was more a case of someone identifying a single variable and failing to recognize that it was not the only variable, right? So in this particular case, what we were discussing was some issues with tax, and the framework that they had built was they said, hey, well, in this case, will CFC rules apply? And the whole point was, it doesn't matter if CFC rules apply in that example. That's not the problem. You're solving for the wrong problem if you think that's what you're going for. You need to be solving for this other problem. And the truth is, that might be a valid problem in a bunch of cases, but these here are equally valid, right? So I guess I would describe that as fully accounting for your variables, right? Or your drivers, recognizing that, although something may be a lever, there may be multiple levers, there may be multiple factors of influence, okay? So that would be another one. Another thing that I find happens for people quite a bit is they tend to ignore the weighting of things, okay? What do I mean by this? What I mean is that in most cases you have what I would call factors of disproportionate influence. What does this mean? This means that some things are overwhelmingly important compared to some others. I've noticed this in a lot of cases in life where if you nail certain things, a lot of other things kind of take care of themselves. And it's a really interesting question to ask people who have solved something difficult or worked through some problem, or developed some skill, built some achievement, like what are the hardest things along the process? And because there's certain things that are pretty easy to solve for, right? And then there's some that are really, really big deals. So I'll give you an example of this. I had back in the day a company, it was a spa. And so part of the process in a spa is, of course, you have some sort of an upsell procedure, right? You want to get people rebooked and you want to get them purchasing other services, goods, etc. And I remember a friend of mine came in and used the services and told me, hey, you should be getting your staff to do this, this, and this. And I was like, yeah, I know. The problem is not failure, a lack of knowledge on that procedure. It's getting people to actually do the thing that needs to be done. This is a factor of disproportionate influence, right? This thing here is minor compared to this here. And there's lots of examples like that, right? For example, if you nail really good product market fit in a business, then selling the product is much, much easier. If you have poor product market fit, it's really, really hard to sell. If you nail product market fit, selling becomes comparatively easy because it's fairly easy to communicate, right? So these factors, it's just a factor of disproportionate influence. You might look at if your customer value is high enough in a business, right? If you have a sufficiently valuable customer, then it's fairly easy to make money in a business because of the fact that you can afford to spend a lot getting that customer. If you have something where you're trying to make, let's just say that a sale is worth $1 for you, right? Hey, I'm selling something and I only make $1 per customer per sale. Very, very difficult to do that business because you're likely going to spend far more than $1 acquiring that customer. So you're almost certainly going to lose money. If it's, let's just use an extreme example. If you could make $1 million off a customer, it's so easy to invest the resources into getting that. Like, you can afford to do insane things for $1 million to get a customer, right? That it becomes unbelievable. And so, I mean, usually you're not going to have a client or a business like that, but it's a great way of examining what businesses to go into, right? If you go into a business where you have a really big margin of safety like that, then you can do well. And it's actually one of the things that separates an early stage versus a late stage business, right? When you've got businesses that, like, an industry is very developed, usually they've honed it to such a degree and they've kind of squeezed the margins out of it to a level of efficiency such that you're at a stage where it doesn't matter if you're coming in. It's really hard as a new entrant because you need to run so efficiently, but that efficiency usually requires that you've already fine-tuned your machine. And so it's very, very difficult to get in, right? Versus when you're coming into something new, you want to look for something that it's like, you can get a lot of stuff wrong and still be successful, right? So that's another example. And I find this happens actually very often with really smart people. Really smart people, I find, tend to overlook these factors of disproportionate influence. They're too focused on these little, like, trying to optimize for these little things, and they miss that you don't have to be that smart if you can find some of these things that just have really big wins. The same is true in investing. If you're investing and you get a sufficiently good price, then it's relatively easy to make money. If you get a bad price, it's really hard to make money. You know, that's just the way that it goes. So there's just a few things that you can control for there. So identifying factors of disproportionate influence can be really useful. And along that line, you can say, kind of like separating out kind of real world, like, what are the way that things actually work versus what way do they work in theory, right? So that's another example. What are some others that we might pay attention to? So another one would be kind of this root cause analysis thing, right? Which is, oftentimes people solve on the surface level, right? So they say, hey, this is the problem. And that might be a problem, but the problem is that problem is caused by a deeper problem, which maybe is caused by a deeper problem, which is caused by a deeper problem. And so going back to the example in Toyota, what did they do? They trained their people to ask the 5 whys, right? So they would ask 5 levels deep. Now, there's since been some criticism about using the word why, that it tends to create the 5 blames. And so, you know, you might change the question and say, well, what caused that, right? So let's just use an example. Let's say that you are on an assembly line and you get a product defect, right? So, okay, well, you might say, okay, hey, we've got this problem with this product defect. That doesn't really take you very far. So you might say, okay, well, what went wrong that caused the product defect? And you might say, oh, well, the calipers on this machine were off, and as a result, you didn't get the proper alignment, right? And so, okay, like, what would be the solution? Well, you'd go and kind of fix that alignment. But what they would say is, they would say, well, hang on, let's go deeper and ask, well, what happened? Why is it, right? Or what caused it not to have the calipers aligned, right? Because that should have been the case. And so then maybe you go and you find out that, oh, there's some other machine or some other human intervention. You know, there's some, maybe how you're calibrating it, there's some sort of a chart that's off or something, right? I'm just making things up at this point in time. And so that has to be fixed. And if you fix that, it's going to correct these other things down the road. And then you can say, well, hang on, how come that chart was off, right? And you go back, another level. And so they need to go 5 levels deep. And if you go 5 levels deep, you're going to identify a lot more essence of the problem. And so we could look at many, many things in life in that way, right? We could look at within a business, within our own personal, maybe you would say something like, I'm not eating healthy, right? So you might say, okay, problem is I'm getting fat, I'm gaining weight. Okay, well, that's not good. All right, well, then you might say, well, how come that is? It's like, okay, well, that's because I'm not eating healthy. Okay, well, how come I'm not eating healthy? And it might be, well, the foods that I'm eating the healthy foods are not accessible. Okay, so then we might say, well, hang on, how come healthy foods are not accessible? It might be, okay, well, where I'm shopping doesn't have a plentiful supply of them, or the types of things that I have a shortage of time, and because I have a shortage of time, I want things that are very fast and convenient, and so I don't have time to prepare, etc. Okay, well, then I can go back and I can say, well, hang on, how come I don't have the time to prepare, etc. And you might say, okay, well, I'm in a situation where I'm overwhelmed because I've got too many clients, I've got things coming in. And so you might notice that if you kind of run down this causal chain, you might identify that, oh, the solution is I need to put some systems in place, organize myself better, raise my prices, put it into a situation where I hire some people to outsource, take some of the work off my plate, etc. And that happens to provide time, which allows me to get healthier food, which allows me to, all down the line. I've noticed this for myself lately with sleep. I normally had an amazing sleep schedule. It was fantastic for years and years. And in the last year, my sleep schedule has been really bad. And I notice how when my sleep is off, I have a series of other things that start to come out of that are negative, right? So you can kind of start looking at, okay, well, we need to address that sleep issue, and you can go back to, well, how come the sleep issue is off? And again, you can start running back to figure that out. So those would be a few things that I think are useful. There's lots of different things that we can pay attention to, of course, but just briefly, correlation versus causation. I had mentioned catalysts, so some people confuse catalysts for causes. That was something that I did a video on a little while back about kind of understanding structural instability of systems. Second of all would be they may confuse conduits with causes, right? So you can kind of see that by kind of following the causal chain backwards. And then, of course, correlation with causation, or just simply reversing the causation. So making sure that the order of the causal chain is accurate, right? So that's one. That's two. So then we've got multivariables, right? Having lots of not properly identifying all the variables in what's going on, or all the drivers, etc. We might pay attention to factors of disproportionate influence, right? As well as how much things work in real life. Like, what is hey, listen, this might sound good in theory, but really how does it work in real life is quite different. And then the last one was, of course, paying attention to the 5 whys, or root cause analysis of going back. So anyway, that's like the basic concept. I hope it gives some idea. It's something that, I'm kind of passionate about mental models and how we think about the world, just because I think if we solve for that, and this is kind of like this root cause thing, right? If we solve for thinking better, if we teach ourselves to think better about problems, then everything else is going to do better coming out of that. So anyway, I hope that helps. And maybe one last one that I get, of course, emotions and cognitive biases getting in the way, because those things can totally throw us off. So I guess being aware of cognitive biases, checking ourselves for that, and kind of dealing with emotions a little bit better. If you guys have some suggestions for ways to better identify what the actual problems are, so that we can solve for the right problem, as opposed to solving for something that might seem great but really isn't the real problem, then would love to hear it in the comments below. Follow me on Twitter, Michael Rosmer. And again, if you need help with any of these things, please reach out to me. Subscribe to the channel, like the video if you like it, share it with your friends, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.